want to cross over to Mali, and of course, we are now also mourning some of the soldiers that, were attacked by the Islamist group ISIS. This is happening in Mali, 49 of them so far. And we've seen also the French Armed Forces Minister, that is Pali, that she is now down on the ground. This is Florence Pali visiting the Sahel countries right now. But the question really comes to the fore, and maybe you can, because these Sahel forces that were meant to, counter some of these terrorist attacks in the region, so far it's not really been effective, so to speak, from your own analysis, because if we may look at Africa right now, the flare-ups have been happening around that particular region, right? Ivory Coast, I know it's not within, is it within the Sahel? Not yet, right? But we've seen Niger, we've seen Burkina Faso, we've seen also just across the border, we had other also, or just near the border, we had other soldiers also being felled by the Islamist group. The Sahel forces down on the ground, and the Bakabe operation, is it effective?
Well, I think it speaks for itself. It's not.
It's not.
Yeah, and the challenge is, first of all, there are too few. And while they have an interest in combating terrorism and stuff like that, we also know the history of French involvement on the continent. But when you start an initiative, but you don't back it with sufficient training and equipment, you turn especially soldiers into sitting ducks. And they're so exposed. Now, this one led to about 70 deaths we're talking about. Less than a month ago, there was another attack where I think 40 were killed and then 20 went missing. And I assume they were also probably killed. Mm-hmm. So it's not just now. These are sitting ducks. They are not properly protected. They've been protests in Bamako from French families, or rather from families, soldiers previously, that these people are not well protected, they're not well equipped, they don't have the right tools to actually prosecute the war. And despite the involvement of course, some foreign forces, if you cannot equip the Malian military sufficiently and security services and give them capacity, they are just going to be sitting ducks and they're going to kill more and more. Remember, a number of these terrorists, they understand the terrain. Mm-hmm. They actually understand the system. Some of them could even have served in the military before. Mm-hmm. And so they understand the weaknesses. But have we moved towards making sure we actually bridge that gap that exists? I don't think we've done that. So when you have a few foreign troops or French troops in this quarter and in this center alone, and then the whole country is exposed, this is a vast desert place, seriously speaking, it's making Mali increasingly insecure. Now, the challenge of also having foreign forces without sufficient protection, because foreign forces tend to increase the narrative of foreign occupation, and especially the jihadist movement. Like you see, this is a confirmation. They're taking over our land. They want to destroy us. Now, if you're going to engage that, you must make sure you also protect yourself and then back it up with force. But Mali does not have sufficient force. It does not have sufficient organization. It does not even have enough food to feed its own people. How are you really going to defeat terrorism?
Mm-hmm. How are you going to defeat terrorism if you cannot, afford the basics? Hamedashi.
About 10 to 15 years ago, Libya, if you looked at Libya and Mali, every analyst would tell you that Mali was the one that was going to face state collapse and not Libya. But it's the other way around. Libya has faced state collapse because of intervention from international actors. And Mali is at the crucible, is at the epicenter of the entire problem of the state and the market in Africa. It is an example of how the fragility of states in our continent is going to cause a conflagration in large swaths of this continent. And the reason is in the last 50 years, as you know, that the Africa was a playfield of the Cold War, and all these dictatorial one-party states were propped up either by the Soviet Union or the United States. As an African optimist, I'm always giving us the responsibility to fix these things and not cry over what other people have done. But the fact of the matter is that there's been huge involvement in all of Africa during the last 50 years. Today we stand at a precipice of where we're going to have to move forward. In what way are we going to move these states and markets so that they become stable? Mali, Mauritania, and all the Sahel countries over there, have massive deposits of minerals, oils, gas, that can help make the society much more cohesive. That requires leadership, of course, and you know, most of the leaders in this place have either come through coup d'etats or former military officers. Mm-hmm. So there is an existential crisis in many of these developing countries in the Sahel. And apart from that, Debal, is that the Sahara Desert is encroaching on the environmental issue. The issue of global warming has added to the crucible of these problems. And in the Sahara now is moving at a rate that just astonishes even the most forward-looking environmentalists. So, Debal, it is a conundrum wrapped up in an irony, and I think there's three solutions that I can give. And the most important solution is the regional bloc of Western Africa, where they can trade among each other, they can strengthen ECOWAS, and try and beat back the sands of the Sahara by planting more trees and demanding from the international community a tax for global warming, because this has been caused by the more industrialized countries. And also, I think the second solution I would provide, Debal, is not only our job to criticize, but to also provide solutions, is that there has to be leadership in those countries that really care about the basic economic and political rights of their citizens, and to make sure that the free market tries to produce something for the people of this country.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Debal, this is the challenge where you have the architects of the global war on terror,
yes,
planning in designing operations in Washington, Paris, London, Tel Aviv, and other places, and sending a minimal number of troops and resources to the actual theaters of war. The problem with Mali and the extended Sahel region now is, and this is where this global war on terror is bungled, even the communities that were suffering under at the hands of these terrorist groups, they've seen that the forces, whether it's Malian forces or those now in Niger with this latest attack, they cannot protect them. And so communities have moved away from the security forces of those nations, and so that they cannot be targeted by the terrorists. The Islamic State in West Africa, Islamic State in Maghreb, and now a new group that is calling itself the Islamic State, the Islamic State Group in Sahara, ISGS, that claimed that it carried out those attacks. All these groups are really putting pressure on the populations to not support the governments. And there is no need for governments to start wars that they cannot finish, that they cannot see how the populations that they should be protecting then are just left to the devices, to their own devices, and to the mercy of these terrorist groups. This is a major problem. Again, it shows clearly the limitations in the use of force to address terrorism. These conflicts that have come up in the last few years because of the global war on terror was entirely expected, and there was no need to actually carry on this kind of war in particular locations in the manner that they have. Nation states will have to take more responsibilities for their own populations, and not just to take orders from the planners and architects of this war from far away cities.
Right. Could we say that also maybe this was a retaliatory attack, given that now Baghdadi is gone? They're trying to, just showcase the muscle that still ISIS also is strong?
Maybe and
Maybe it
maybe
is,
not.
and maybe not.
Maybe and maybe not, Dipal. These guys, power within. There hasn't been really command and control structure within ISIS, and so these commanders in the field have been taking their own independent decisions to attack, to carry out attacks on Western forces that are in these places, or to attack national forces that are in those communities, or populations that seem to be in support of the governments. It's a much more complicated problem, actually, and the cover of terrorism actually is oversimplifying some of the problems that we are having in these places. And I'm sure Ambassador Mwencha will tell us more about that. He's had to deal with these issues in the 10 years that he was at the Africa Union.
All right, Ambassador Rasas Mwencha.
Well, incidentally, yesterday I was with the former foreign minister of Mali, and I asked him exactly the same question that you have asked as to what is happening. And I think, as Mustafa said, the war in Mali is so complicated, and we have not really understood, because even you don't know which party to bring to the table to have an agreement. And there are even parties there who don't want that war to end, because it is a war economy. Those that engage in terms of trade, whether it is human trafficking or gold or whatever has been talked about, that's one element. There is also a religious aspect, and that's how you bring all these other aspects. Then, of course, what has been said, there is a ratio aspect. The blacks versus Arab looking, whatever, it's also a big problem. There is a regional issue, north versus south, and you've seen what has happened. But I think there is also weapons that are loose all over, and especially with the collapse of Libya and the rest.
Yes.
And so there is so much. I remember having gone there one time with the president, the chairman of the AU at that time, President Mugabe, to sign a peace deal. And even the number of people who were signing the peace deal, you couldn't count, because of all these factions. So you took almost 4 hours signing just signatures. So there is a problem in Mali. And Mali is, of course, the trigger has also been with the collapse of Libya. Situation has been exacerbated. The area that was attacked was an EU training facility for soldiers supposed to equip Mali. And I think this was the question you asked at the beginning. Does it have capacity? Mali doesn't have that capacity yet. In fact, you remember even when there was a time, the military were trying to take over. And if it wasn't France that moved in, and the AU and the rest of us were embarrassed that it is France that stopped that, that would have been a coup. And so the government came in with that mutual, bad blood between the government and the military. So there is so much happening in Mali that I sometimes you wonder, you sleep and they say, where do you begin? Yeah.
But that's is it Bahane, the Bahane operation?
Yes.
What is it all about? The French being heavily involved in this as well.
You see, if you look at particularly the middle area and the rest, the government is not even able to move and provide services. Those are now areas controlled by militias.
Right.
So they have been trying to clean up those areas. But it is like what we've been talking about, Al-Shabaab. You clean up, but who are you going to leave behind? So there is a huge problem in Mali.
All right, huge problem in Mali. Yeah. Let's wind up with Noami Dambo on this. We try and also turn the crack now to what is happening also in that Iran nuclear deal. But finally, your thoughts on Mali?
Well, it is not only Mali. There are 3 countries really at this point in that area that face a failed state. And that is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Niger, okay.
What happened is the fight in Mali has spilled over to this other country, using their ethnic, rivalry and everything, and entered through the force. So those 3 countries face very similar situation like Mali. And they don't have the ability, they don't have the force enough to control the internal force. They're facing incredible external shadow aggressors that are interested in exploiting mineral resources, oil and gas and everything, and this is going to continue. The French force alone will not contain the situation in this area.
Okay.
And the worst situation is to have ISIS element migrate from the Middle East into this zone. And then we have a mess on our hands.
Okay, we want to also discuss what is happening in Iran. Of course, we ran a story on how President Hassan Rouhani has now announced that Iran will resume Iranian arrangement at an underground plant south of Tehran. And this is the latest step back from a troubled 2015 agreement with the major powers. Already also Russia is expressing also concern about this particular, a blowback on this development. I don't know. So they're dialing back on the agreement. President Trump began it. So we shouldn't be surprised by what Rouhani is actually announcing.
Well, of course we shouldn't be surprised. When you're a state, you have to think like a state, and you can only use the instruments at your disposal in trying to negotiate with the rest of the world. When the United States withdrew from the arrangement and imposed sanctions, it completely destroyed the export for oil. It has really destroyed the Iranian currency. It does not have a lot of places to go to. Now, the challenge with that is because of the size and the influence of U.S. economy, the just pervasive influence over the world, a lot of European companies that were also in Iran actually decided to pull out because of potential sanctions from the United States. Now, it's also important for us, for the audience, to understand that it has not actually crossed the threshold where you say it has completely violated the agreement, Iran itself, because the current enrichment is only about 3 to 4%. What you need for this is sufficient for power plants. This is actually what was importing anyway under the agreement, as in you can only have this type of enrichment. It's called isotope, I think, U-225. Yes. Yeah, it's only sufficient to be used in power plants. To get to the threshold of nuclear weapons, it has to be 90% and above. So Iran is not anywhere close to actually getting there. However, it is sending a message by injecting gas in those centrifuges that we can actually go back and we still have the capacity to do this. And probably that is a strategy to try and perhaps extract certain concessions and perhaps force some of the parties to the negotiating table and say, hey, Europe, you've been unable to guarantee us the business you promised. You better do something dramatic or else we're out of this. And then that, of course, is going to bring lots of chaos in the Middle East itself. Israel has vowed to attack installations. And if it does and goes ahead to do that, it's going to be chaotic because Israel alone cannot actually destroy Iran. It's way too big.
Thank you. Yes. So, Hamid Hashi, you think this is a geopolitical posturing from President Rouhani?
I largely agree with my colleague. I also want to add that I think that the nature of the Iranian state is very important to understand. It was born out of a very fervent revolution that was very anti-Western. There is a streak in the culture and politics and ideas of Iran that is very antithetical to how Western civilizations and Western states deal with things in the East, in the Middle East. And if you're going to remember, Iran is Persia. Persia is a very old society and a very old state. And I think that the Ayatollahs who rule that place today are not going to blink. If people believe that Iran is going to have a traditional diplomatic give and take, I think they're going to be mistaken because the leaders there are quite revolutionary and quite adamant about where they stand on the fundamental issues of war and peace in the Middle East. And I think that, we have a very right-wing, very hawkish prime minister in Israel. And hopefully the Israeli army is going to restrain Mr. Netanyahu and reject his hawkish stance in Iran.
Thank you.
Mr. Netanyahu is still the Prime Minister of Israel, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Of course he is.
Still is. So they went through an election and he won. So last point about this is a really important point. If Israel decides to bomb the installations where Iran is building these nuclear reactors, or whatever you want to name them, I think all the bets are off for world peace after that.
Right. Let's hear briefly also from Dr. Mustafa.
Dibal, with regard to Iran, the JCPOA plan of action that was signed by the P5+1 in Vienna in 2015 was the best chance for the Middle East, for the world, to actually make sure that Iran does not go nuclear. And unfortunately, the United States of America, to the chagrin of the EU countries, reneged on that particular deal. And Iran, being a master of a political brinkmanship, they're really going to push that towards the threshold, and God knows what else is going to happen after that. It's going to be a very difficult time for the Middle East.
Thank you.